What's going on, guys? Today we're going to theorize how things would have changed if Erwin inherited the Colossal during Season 3 of Attack on Titan. As we all know, Levi's choice to give this shifter to Armin was a big surprise, even to the freaking people who wanted it to happen, and in Erwin's absence, Hanji became the newest leader of the Survey Corps. Over the following years, they did learn a lot about the outside world, but failed to take significant steps when it came to protecting the island, frustrating Eren so much that he met Yelena in secret, infiltrated Marley without permission, and then started a civil war when he returned to Paradise. In my opinion, many of those things wouldn't have happened if Erwin survived, because he usually had a solid plan for any situation, meaning if he was alive, he could have found an alternate path for survival that no one thought of in the main show. This video is part 1 of a new series that will examine this alternate reality, but before we get into it, I'm giving away one Funko of the Commander himself, and all you have to do to enter is simply sub to the channel and leave a comment below. The winner will be chosen at random using commentpicker.com and will be announced during part 2 of this series next month. But remember, you have to be subbed if you want your comment to have a chance. Okay, so the best place to start this video off is when Levi was about to give Erwin the injection, because the syringe was literally in his arm, and realistically speaking, all Levi had to do was push down. In the original timeline, the captain paused at this moment as he briefly thought about Armin's dream to reach the sea, but more importantly, he also thought about the wise words of his favorite uncle. According to Kenny Ackerman, all humans need something to chase after or else there'd be no reason to keep on living, and for Erwin, his motivation was to avenge his father's death by uncovering the truth about the world. Earlier, he'd mentioned how this was more important to him than the survival of humanity, but as the commander of the Survey Corps, he was backed into a corner where he really had to give up on his dream to defeat the Beast Titan. He knew the scouts wouldn't charge at Zeke unless he was leading them, and it was thanks to Levi's harsh words that Erwin accepted it was time for his dream to die. This acceptance of his dream being over is a major factor in why the captain decided not to bring him back, but in this alternate timeline that obviously can't happen. For argument's sake, let's just say Levi no longer hesitates at the crucial moment, and turns the commander into a pure Titan straight away like he intended. Following that transformation, Erwin will wake up many hours later having eaten Bertolt, and the first thing he noticed is the brand new right arm that would have grown while he was asleep. This arm was bitten off by a random Titan in Season 2, but with it returning, he would instantly realize that he's now become a Titan shifter. As with most people who gain these abilities, the commander would have no memory of the events surrounding it, so for all he knows he could be the new Beast Titan, the new Armor Titan, or even the new Cart Titan, he genuinely just have no idea. Levi would likely be the one to update him on everything that happened, and once that's explained, they'd set out to find the Jaeger family basement, with Mikasa and Eren leading the way. While I think Eren would be a complete mess thanks to Armin's death, back in Trust, Mikasa did show composure when it comes to this kind of thing, so I feel like she'd be able to calm him down and refocus him on the task at hand. Obviously, you could argue that she wasn't that composed a few hours earlier, but with Armin now actually being gone, I feel like she'd accept there's nothing they can do to bring him back. After searching the basement long enough, they'd eventually find the 3 hidden notebooks left behind by Grisha Jaeger, and this discovery would be the culmination of Erwin's dream. As he said, he had to be there when they learned the truth about the world, and now having learned that truth, he'd realized their enemy is a massive nation that wants to steal the founding Titan. Because Marley failed in their mission, everyone would know they will return at some point to try and capture Eren, so strengthening the island's defenses becomes his new top priority. Over the course of the next few days, Naldok would apologize to Erwin for never taking his theory seriously when they were younger, while separately, Eren and Mikasa would still be made to serve a short jail sentence for trying to give Armin the injection. The time would then come for the leaders of Paradise to decide what they should do with Grisha's notebooks, and of course this is a perfect opportunity for Erwin to give one of his classic speeches, something about how the truth needs to be made public or else all those deaths would be for nothing. Just like in the original timeline, it's likely that during this meeting Eren would realize how to access the Founder's power, but Eren being Eren, he'd stay quiet because he wouldn't want to risk his story being turned into a Titan, especially now that he's already lost one of his closest friends. Anyway, the contents of Grisha's notebooks would then be released in the newspaper a day later, revealing the truth about the world to the people of the island. The release of this information would also serve a secondary purpose for the commander, as he would be starting a recruitment drive to rebuild the Survey Corps to numbers never seen before. When you combine high public morale with the charisma of a leader like Erwin, thousands of regular civilians could be convinced to become new recruits, while hundreds of existing soldiers would defect to join the scouts. Nal in particular is someone who I think would leave the MPs to join the Survey Corps ranks, as after everything that went down, I think he'd want to follow his old friend for whatever's about to happen. In the months after this, Erwin would spend time revamping what the Survey Corps are about, slowly turning them into an army that's more prepared to fight back against an invasion. All the soldiers who recently joined from other military branches would now be trained to use Thunder Spears, while the fresh recruits would mainly focus on how to kill humans and Titan shifters. This type of evolution is a logical step that I think Erwin would take, as in the past he mentioned how he viewed the scouts as a spear made to eliminate threats. Given that Marley's biggest threat comes from their shifters and the humans who might be helping them, it only makes sense that the scouts would need to move on from their old ways of thinking. While all of this training is going on, the Executioner from Hell would be systematically wiping out most pure Titans on Paradise, and by the winter, 99.9% of them would be gone. Fast forward to the spring, and the scouts would conduct their first expedition to the sea, with the commander planning to construct a military base where the Marleyan Wall currently stands. He'd know that when Marley returns, they'll likely come to this location given that, they made it themselves. So the idea would be for the base to be fortified with weapons and have at least one Titan shifter present at all times. Later that same year, while the base is under construction, Marley would send their first fleet of survey ships to inspect the island, and on board would be Yelena, Onyankopon, and a very suspect amount of Marleyan wine. In the main show, the arrival of Zeke's anti-Marleyan volunteers caused a serious debate, with certain people believing they should all be executed, while others like Hanji believing that the volunteers could be useful. When it comes to Erwin, I think he'd initially be somewhere in the middle, cause on the one hand, after seeing what Zeke did to the scouts, there's no way he'd believe the Beast Titan suddenly wants to help the same people he killed. The commander would probably think that the volunteers are part of some kind of trick to steal the Founding Titan, a sentiment that was shared by Zachary as well. On the other hand, Erwin would also realize that these guys can provide technology and knowledge that they can't get anywhere else, so it could be a mistake to not use that to their advantage. For that reason, I think that working carefully with the volunteers is a gamble the commander would be willing to make, because the benefits will outweigh the costs as long as they can keep the Founding Titan safe. Now, for those of you that maybe forgot, when Yelena arrived, she instantly revealed a lot of important information about Marley, including the size and structure of their army, the type of weapons they use, and the development of their airships. On top of that, one of the more interesting things she says that often gets overlooked was that Marley couldn't invade Paradis at this time, largely because they were involved in a completely different war. After losing the female and colossal titans, they were perceived as weak by other countries, and so Marley's many enemies gathered together to try and take them out. In the original timeline, this was mentioned once by Yelena and never spoken of by Hanji again, but for someone like Erwin, he'd see the war as a chance to crush their biggest enemy. He said himself that his goal after reaching the basement would be to eliminate threats on the other side of the walls, and with the right strategy, the Mideast War provided a perfect battleground to wipe out Marley and potentially make allies at the same time. Hear me out on that one. While it's true the entire world seriously hates Paradis, based on everything we know, you could argue the Marleyan military is almost equally as hated. For 100 years, they used Titan shifters to dominate the planet, invading countless countries along the way and forcing civilians like Onyankopon to join their army. Many of those victories were only possible thanks to the Titans, so it's fair to say that if the warriors could somehow be eliminated, then Marley would very probably lose the Mideast War. In the main series, we saw how the Mideast Alliance was beaten thanks to the Beast and Armored Titans, but in this alternate timeline, Erwin's new strategy could destroy the warrior unit before this even happens. In doing that, they could change how millions of people around the world perceive Paradis, and while it wouldn't magically stop prejudice against Eldians, at the very least it could allow the island to make allies with the Middle East. Obviously, there are a lot of steps that need to happen for this to be a possibility, because for a start, it would take some serious convincing for the Alliance to put aside their prejudice and accept help from the Scouts. I know some of you watching might even think it's just impossible for that to happen, but when it comes to war, certain countries are willing to win by whatever means necessary. Mali itself is perhaps the perfect example of that, because they were oppressed for 2,000 years by the Titans, yet as soon as the opportunity presented itself, they didn't hesitate to take 7 Titan shifters and use them for themselves. It's fair to say the Middle Eastern Alliance would likely be no different. All it takes is for someone to convince them that they can't beat Marley without assistance from the Titans of Paradis. More details about this potential team up will be shown in part 2, but for now let's move over to what would happen in the months after the volunteers arrive. To start with, Eren would reveal the secret he's been hiding about how to activate the Founding Titan, and in this moment the possibility of a rumbling becomes known to everyone in the room. In my opinion, the commander would treat the rumbling as a backup option in case they were like being bombarded or something, but no way would it be his number one choice, cause first of all, a full-scale rumbling was never anyone's first option, and even a partial use of the rumbling would only make Paradis a bigger target to those who survive. If Erwin's idea to join the Mideast War is going to happen, they need to avoid making new enemies by doing a rumbling, and instead focus on diplomacy starting with Asia and the Middle East. By establishing peace agreements with those other nations, it could be the start of a relationship that in the long term can turn Paradis into a modern country that doesn't need Titans to survive. In the year 842, Hizuru would then make their initial visit to the island, and at the time of their arrival, the Mideast War would still be raging on. This meeting would be important for a number of reasons, but above everything else, it's a chance for Erwin to persuade Kiyomi to abandon Zeke's proposal and follow his idea instead. As we all know, Zeke's plan required Eren to activate a small-scale rumbling to scare off other nations for the next 50 years, and in that time, Hizuru would then help build Paradis into a modern country. The big downside was that Historia and her descendants would have to inherit the Beast Titan, so that they always had a Titan of royal blood and could therefore always do the rumbling. The problem is that this is something Eren was desperate to avoid, and I think with Armin having died in this new timeline, he'd be even more determined to make sure the rest of his friends can live long lives. Because of this, Eren would 100% be against Zeke's rumbling idea and would put his faith in the commander instead, who, his plan by contrast doesn't require a Titan of royal blood, but what it does need is cooperation from other countries, starting with the Asian clan. Hizru's resources would enable the scouts to infiltrate Marley, at which point they can split into teams and steal the Jaw, Armored Cart, and possibly the Beast Titan. Whether they take the Beast Titan will depend on certain factors that will be discussed in the next video, but the main point is that by launching a surprise attack on the warrior unit, Marley will be weakened to a point where they can potentially be destroyed. It should be said though that if Kiyomi was to assist the scouts in this alternate plan, it would be a massive betrayal of Zeke's trust, since if they're not going to do a rumbling, then there's no reason why Paradis would bring him to meet his brother. That being said, Zeke's troubles aren't really Kiyomi's problem, as the anime showed us she's capable of betraying people or lying to their face if it serves her best interests. Given that her country's been on the decline ever since the Great Titan War, I generally feel like she could be persuaded by Erwin to go along with his plan, as long as it still involves her getting access to the Iceburst Stone reserves. The Iceburst Stone is a special fuel source found only on Paradis, and according to Kiyomi it's so valuable that it could return her nation to its former glory, so she'd be desperate to reach a deal with the Eldians even if it's not the one she originally planned. In return for access to the Iceburst Stone, Hizuru can provide the scouts with travel to Marley and the Middle East, as well as passing on the tools needed to build the island into a more civilized society. The way I see it, both sides have something the other wants, so for that reason Kiyomi and Erwin should be able to reach an agreement that doesn't involve the rumbling. And yeah, you'll see how that develops in part 2. Before I end this one, there were two things I didn't get the chance to talk about yet, the first being whether Bertolt's memories would be affecting the commander in any way. In the main timeline, we saw how Bertolt's influence made Armin fall in love with a crystal, but for the commander, I personally don't think that would happen. Unlike Armin, he had no pre-existing relationship with either Bertolt or Annie, and that was clearly a factor in why Armin was being haunted from the very beginning. Most of the time, the memories of a predecessor don't majorly affect the next person anyway. As you've seen with Ymir, Reiner, and even Bertolt himself, they were all unaffected by the previous person. I think Erwin would likely be in that same group, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. The second thing I didn't get to mention were the events surrounding this ceremony, as in the original series, Eren kissed Historia's hand, causing him to see memories from different points in time. This kiss would still happen in the alternate reality where Erwin survived, although the visions Eren sees now would not be exactly the same. I imagine he'd still pull the same face though, because there are a few ways in which this timeline is actually much worse than the original one, but we'll get to that in future parts. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to smash that sub button if you haven't already, and until the next one, peace out.